got questions and the Pactum has answers. Welcome to this episode of the Pactum. It's a Pactum Responsum where we respond to your questions. Questions about the Bible, questions about theology, questions about Christian living. And I'm Pat Abendroth with Mike Grimes.
That's right. We're here on the Pactum ready to answer your questions.
Mike, I just want to know, have you heard the AI mashup yet? Oh, no. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer by Creed.
I have heard it, and that is only because you played it for me. Okay. And I am here to tell the
what is your
response?
Tell us your response.
Well, at first I thought you were just playing a Creed song for me because it's the song Higher, right? Is that the title, I think?
I think so.
And at first I was like, I've heard this, and I'm like, wait, those aren't the right lyrics. And sure enough, it's Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer sung by Creed to the song Higher. It's hilarious.
I think it's hilarious. I played it like 20 times this morning, and then I brought it into Andrew Meyer's office, who's in the room with us, and he wasn't very happy because he's not a Creed fan. Hey, Andrew.
I don't know how to respond to that.
Creed fan or not a Creed fan?
It's fun.
It's well done.
It is.
Make sure you look it up and get yourself a little chuckle.
That's right. And this is a Christmas Day episode. It's Christmas Day of 2024 when this is releasing. Yes. So it's a great day to hear Creed singing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
We could start singing it, but we might get tagged on YouTube or something.
Yeah, I don't want to have a copyright violation or something like that.
So let's not do that.
They'll mistake you for Creed.
Speaking of, since we are on the YouTubes,
yes,
you better tell people we're still buried.
We are still buried.
So how can people find us so that they can like and subscribe and make us easier to find?
Yeah, if you're listening, you can find us all in the same places you've always found us. You can find us on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, any of your favorite podcast places. You can find us online at thepactumtheology.org. However, on YouTube, if you go to YouTube and you type in just the words The Pactum, you may not find us. So what you're going to do is go to YouTube, go to that search bar, and you're going to enter at The Pactum with no spaces or anything. So kind of like those Twitter handles that you used to, at whatever, Indeed. At the Pactum, and you'll find us there. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, drop some comments below.
Only good ones, please.
Only good ones, yeah.
Okay, how about Reformation Heritage Books?
That's right. This episode is sponsored by Reformation Heritage Books. They have a plethora of great resources
if not
for you.
More than several.
They have more than several. A plethora of great resources for you to find over at heritagebooks.org. While you're there, you can check out Puritan Treasures for Today. That is at heritagebooks.org/Puritan Treasures. That's some of the writings of guys like John Owen, Jeremiah Burroughs, updated with some modern language, some helpful intros to help you kind of access and understand. Is that a word? Access and understand those Puritan writers. Yeah. So Reformation Heritage Books, go to their website and make sure you enter the code PACTUM, P-A-C-T-U-M, for 10% off your order.
I see they just started following the Pactum on X, and I just want to say it's about time.
We've arrived.
I mean, come on, you want to be with all the other cool kids and follow the Pactum on X.
Right.
So, kind of nice to see that.
Who doesn't want to follow
and
us?
Maybe our Pactum listeners noticed, maybe they didn't, Mike, that we named the Puritans that we like.
Yeah.
It's a good way to roll.
We do it.
Not all Puritans are created equal.
Not all are created equal.
That's
That's
true.
Right. Yeah.
Well, we have all kinds of questions. And,
we do.
I love it when we get questions because I'm a fan of Q&A.
Yeah, this is good.
Because that way we even like to encourage those who listen or watch.
Yeah.
How would you answer the question?
Yeah.
Make it a game.
Make
it fun.
Right? Stop, push pause, hold that recording.
It could become a Pactum board game somehow.
It could be.
I'm not a game fan. Are you?
I have to be in the mood for. I used to love to play games, but now I'm kind of. I don't know if I'm getting old and curmudgeonly or what it is, but I have to be in the right mood for a game.
See, I'm the opposite. I used to play games with Molly's family because I was trying to win their hearts and minds.
Sure, yeah.
And now that I'm just old, and did you say curmudgeonly in this episode?
Yes,
now I'm old and curmudgeonly, and I just say I'm out. But this past weekend, I don't know if I got guilted into playing a game, but we played Protect Your Assets.
I don't know that one.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a double entendre.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, it was fine.
Did you win?
I didn't win.
Okay.
I didn't win.
I did not win. We played this past weekend as a family. We played Clue. Kids love Clue.
Okay.
And typically I'll end out just ahead of them because I'm paying attention to every question that's asked and I'm trying to teach the kids how to do that. I lost. They beat me. It was depressing.
Everybody looked at me strange when I said Yahtzee. But
Wrong game.
I guess. I'm kind of behind the times.
Oh, man. Well, this is a Pactum Responsum episode. And for those of you who may not know what a Pactum Responsum episode is, this is kind of like a mailbag type of episode, right? So if you have questions for us, you can email us, connect@thepactum.org. And every so often, we'll collect those questions, and then we'll ask them, pose them here on these Responsum episodes. We've got several questions to work our way through. Shall we get started?
Let's do the first one. I'm
All
ready.
right. First question is on moralism and legalism in the church, and it comes to us from Brendan. Brendan loves the podcast. He's been working through episodes starting at episode 1. Check that out, Brendan. That is awesome. He really appreciates law, gospel distinction, and it's changed how he reads the scriptures. He says, talk about being able to rest in the full, complete, and finished work of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
Makes my day.
Super glad to hear you've been encouraged. He says he's just listened to the latest episode that came out and appreciate your answer to James. So this must have been a previous Responsum episode that he's referring to. We answered a question from James about when to leave a church and when to stay. And he says, regrettably, he and others are running up against a wall here at his church. They're striving to examine their motives and talking to leadership, wanting to be coming out of a place of love, lest they just be a bunch of noisy gongs, he says. But they have closed the communication doors. I think he's referring to those in leadership of the church. We had previously on an episode advised James to engage with his pastor, seek help and encouragement through open communication. Brendan says, what do I or we do when that isn't possible?
Sounds like a hard situation. Here on the Pactum, we are pro-church.
Yes,
we are pro-pastor.
Yep.
And so we always like to say, please be careful, be sober-minded, be thoughtful and loving, assume the best, all of those kinds of things. Because maybe, I don't want to say especially in our day and age, because that sounds kind of curmudgeonly.
In our day and age. And nowadays.
It's true. But even on social media and with podcasts and, YouTube channels, it's easy to be kind of, we're above the church and we don't think that we are actually.
Right.
So remember, the Bible does say that leaders have been given to keep watch over your soul, right?
Yes,
so Hebrews 13:17 is important. And so to whatever degree you possibly can, depending on your church governance, because denominations are different, local congregations are different. I mean, you want to follow whatever available means are there, whatever channels are there afforded to you. Be thoughtful, be careful, be patient, loving. And then eventually, if the time comes when there are simply no options, because it seems like the question had to do with moralism and legalism. And things coming from the pulpit just are not very reformational, very biblical as far as what's proclaimed, at least the way it sounds. We're only hearing one side. Sometimes you do have to move on. And we on the Pactum like to liken local church membership to marriage because it's at least analogous. So if we're breaking up marriages all the time, obviously that's not good. There is a biblical place, we're going to talk about it today on the episode, for divorce and remarriage. But that shouldn't be the norm. So slow down, be patient. I think I've said that a bunch of times already because I can't stress it enough. If you have to go somewhere else, be open and honest with where you're headed, with where you're going, and maybe they can help you through that process. We don't want to burn bridges. We don't want to be ungodly toward the bride of Christ, ultimately, the one the Lord Jesus Christ gave himself for. So can't stress that enough, but sometimes there is a place for needing to move on. So I didn't give very good, clear direction other than pray, be humble. So it's so hard when people leave a church for less than biblical reasons. So try to work it through. Maybe you can seek wise counsel from somewhere other than a podcast, because we don't actually know you. We care. We're glad you're part of the Pactum verse, but we're very cautious about giving this kind of advice because we don't know the situation. Sometimes there are always two sides to every story. So
all right, the second question comes to us from Larry, and this question is in reference to J.I. Packer and Richard Baxter. He says, hey guys, I'm reading, and by reading he says he's listening to the audiobook, a biography of J.I. Packer, and he hadn't realized that J.I. Packer was a Richard Baxter scholar. He said, I had interacted with a few of Packer's writings, and I know he had the whole ECT thing, but I'm not sure what to make of his affection for Baxter. What are your thoughts? What are your opinions?
And no doubt Larry's asking because we're not very big fans of Richard Baxter on the Pactum.
I'm guessing Larry's heard our thoughts on
probably
Richard Baxter.
So let's think. J.I. Packer's interesting.
Yeah.
Thankfully, he's glorified now, so he knows all of these things. But to the positive, his book, Knowing God, obviously, huge influence, impact.
Yes, right, yeah.
Speaking of Puritan writings, it's, if I recall correctly, it's been a long time, but he was seeking to take Puritan ways of thinking in a good sense and make it accessible.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
the book Knowing God has influenced a lot of people
Yes.
in a God-centered kind of way for good. So I would be a fan of that book, even though it's been a long time since I read it. Have you read that book, Knowing God?
I don't know if I ever actually fully completed it, but I have read at least parts of it many, many years ago.
Yep.
Long time ago.
And then his book, Evangelism and Sovereignty of God, is I think maybe one of my very favorite books.
yeah.
It's accessible, easy to read. It's outstanding if you want to understand the sovereignty of God and evangelism and how the two work without compromising either of them.
Right.
What a great book.
Yeah. I think we recommended that book.
I think so
Before
too.
on the
I think so
podcast,
too. I once heard a person who's was not a very big J.I. Packer fan, and they said that he ran out of theology after he wrote those two books. We're not saying that here on the Pactum, but I did hear it from someone with a doctorate once upon a time. So there's that. Oh, I also would commend. See, I'm going to disagree with such sentiments. In the introduction to Hermann Vitzius, spelled with a W, I think it's pronounced with a V, but Hermann
Somebody's going to let us know.
Vitzius, he wrote a book called The Economy of the Covenants Between God and Man. And Packer, later in life, because it's a different edition, he wrote an introduction, and I thought it was awesome.
Yeah.
Really well done. You can buy it as a standalone. I think it's 99 cents on Amazon Kindle, an introduction to covenant theology, or you can go to Monergism and you can actually, can we put that in the show notes?
I think we can.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can go to Monergism, you can get the whole book as well as the introduction. Really, really good. I think I even reference it in the covenant theology book. So outstanding work from Packer, but as our Pactum listener said, what was his name again?
Larry.
Larry, sorry. All right. So as Larry said, there's Evangelicals and Catholics Together in 1994.
Right.
And Packer definitely compromised on that because he didn't make much of justification sola fide, so that would be problematic.
What was Evangelical Catholics Together for those who may not know?
So in 1994, some different scholars got together who were Roman Catholic and who were evangelical, and basically our differences aren't that big.
Okay.
So we both believe in justification by grace through faith in Christ, ignoring the alone part. And certain theologians like R.C. Sproul had apoplexy over this whole thing.
Yep.
And as a quick aside, kind of for fun,
Yes,
I
yeah.
just finished the audio book by Stephen Nichols. I've been talking a lot about it lately, R.C. Sproul.
Yeah.
And it talks about how R.C. had when they moved to Florida, Ligonier moved to Florida, he had his office in a golf course, locker room?
That's so awesome.
And there was a payphone there.
The clubhouse
and
there,
that was
huh?
his phone because they knew the number. And if I recall correctly, that's the payphone where R.C. called J.I. Packer to lovingly confront him.
That is-
Why did you sign the document?
Could you imagine coming in from your round of golf and there's RC on the phone?
It was such an endearing book. It made me smile. It made me want to be more creative. So
That's cool.
Kind of cool. So Evangelicals and Catholics Together. So that was a big deal. And there was good confrontation that happened. There was quite the fallout, even with other theologians that we would know. There was also tension. If you read the Martin Lloyd-Jones biography by Ian Murray, Volume 2 talks about Packer and his interaction with Lloyd-Jones. And it was positive to a degree, but there also was some conflict even way, way, way back when over similar kinds of issues. So what's this question even about?
What do we think about J.I. Packer?
Packer wrote his dissertation on Baxter,
Yes.
and it later became a book. Here's
Yeah.
the book, The Redemption and Restoration of Man in the Thought of Richard Baxter. It's sympathetic. He's defending Baxter. And so, we would say it's not our favorite Packer.
Right.
When he's pro Baxter, it's not our favorite Packer.
That's right.
Sounds kind of funny.
Yeah.
Sounds like we're talking about NFL football or
right.
something like that. And yet, Packer's a mixed bag because listen to this quote.
Yeah.
Shepherd, this is about Norman Shepherd regarding justification and the fallout that happened at Westminster, Philadelphia. Shepherd, in effect, reinvented the Neonomianism of Richard Baxter in the 17th century. And from the same motive, recoil from the practical antinomianism that surrounded him and a desire to state the gospel as to make perfectly obvious that persevering holiness is enjoined on all who hope to be welcomed by Christ the Lord on the day of judgment. Like Baxter, he never understood why was why he was constantly being accused of reintroducing legalism into Reformed soteriology, doctrine of salvation, when his purpose of promoting holiness among Reformed people was so demonstrably right. So in other places, Packer observes that the problem with Shepherd is he was too much like Baxter. And yet, in other senses, he's a promoter.
Yeah, he's promoting.
Baxter.
Yeah, so
kind of confusing.
Yeah.
I think rightfully so. Regarding Richard Baxter, who's just a weird cat, and it's weird that a lot of people love him so much, even today. The Non-Reformed Pastor. I think he wrote a book called The Non-Reformed Pastor. I kid. He wrote a book called The Reformed Pastor that's not very reformed. So in the show notes, let's also make a link to Michael Brown's very helpful article, Not by Faith Alone, the Neonomianism of Richard Baxter. Hats off to Michael Brown for writing that, and it's very helpful.
Yep.
So, Larry, what we're saying to you is Packer's good sometimes.
Yeah, right.
And Packer is not so good other times. I don't mind benefiting from his scholarship and things that he wrote about.
Sure. Yep. And we'll be sure to link to those articles and things in the show notes for you today. Next question comes to us from Sean. And Sean is asking about Old Testament saints. He says, what exactly did Old Testament believers have to believe in order to be saved? This is a good question. In Genesis 4:26, you have men calling upon the name of Yahweh, and in Genesis 6:8, Noah finds favor in the eyes of Yahweh. Hebrews 11 says they were approved by God by faith. Would they have understood Adam to have been in a covenant relationship with God and the seed of the woman in Genesis 3:15 to be a new covenant mediator or someone who they should be hoping for? He says there seems to be some mystery here. I believe God elected, regenerated, and gave Noah faith, but exactly how it works is a bit mysterious to me. Calvin's commentary is interesting here. Maybe I'm too focused on what Noah did and need to think more about what God did. Good question,
Sean, you got a lot going on there.
Yeah.
It shows that you're thinking about this.
Yes,
So
yep.
let's start by saying mystery is good,
Yep.
and there's an important place for mystery
Right.
in our theology.
Yes.
So we work hard, try to figure it out, and then we eventually, as we like to say on the Pactum, we push the mystery button.
Yep.
I don't know exactly how all of it works. It's fine to do that. Let's also acknowledge that progressive revelation is real.
Yes,
So
right.
Hebrews 1, we are moving from shadows and types to substance and antitypes.
Yep.
So that the dimmer switch is going up and up and up, and we see things more clearly. But let's also acknowledge that they probably believed more specifically than perhaps we might have realized,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
depending on your background.
Yeah,
But
yep,
a lot
yep,
of times we think, okay, Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. And almost in some cases, it's stripped down as if he just believed in monotheism.
Sure. Yeah.
Or he
yeah.
just believed that God existed.
Yeah.
And the more I read the Bible, the more I think actually he believed God. It was counted to him as righteousness. That's from Genesis, quoted in Romans chapter 4. I think he probably believed more than we might have realized.
Yeah.
So in light of Genesis 3:15, that's important, and it's referenced by Sean. But then we start hearing things like this. 1 Corinthians 10:4, all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ.
Yeah.
So here we are in the Old Testament and way pre-incarnation, and the rock was Christ. It not only anticipated Christ, it actually was Christ. By the power of the Spirit, I would interject. Those kinds of statements have caused me to stop and say, they probably knew more than we might have thought before.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
And depending on our theological tradition, what we were taught. John chapter 8, verse 56, your father Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day. He saw it and was glad. Abraham, it was more than generic monotheism.
Right, yeah.
He was looking forward, and Jesus says he saw it.
He saw it. Right. Yeah.
So there has to be more to it. And then a cross-reference to that, I'm just doing more Bible verses to kind of bolster this.
Right, yep.
Hebrews 11:13, these all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar. So it's allowing for progressive revelation. There needs to be more. But having seen them and greeted them from afar and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. So it's dim, but it's actually there. It's shadowy,
Right. Yes, yeah.
but it's actually there. And then Hebrews 11:26, he, Moses, considered the reproach of Christ, the reproach of Messiah, greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. So why did Moses go through the things that he went to? Because it was Christological.
Right. Yeah.
How could that be, especially if you've already bought into some kind of naturalistic worldview? Well, then it couldn't be.
Right. Yeah.
But if you buy into a supernatural worldview, which Christians do,
Yes, we do.
why are we whispering?
I don't know.
Because Christians do, actually, you can have the Spirit of Christ showing himself in the Old Covenant world. And he valued the reproach of Christ as greater. So there's that. I think of Job 19.
Yeah.
I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last day he will stand upon the earth. There's lots of New Testament and Old Testament support and evidence that those who believed in the Old Testament and were regenerated by the Spirit were trusting in Christ. They were even in a shadowy sense.
Yes. Yeah.
So you seem very agreeable to this. You going to give me any pushback?
I do. No, I'm
going
to agree with you. I mean, because just as you've been mentioning all these verses, it seems as though there was some belief in not just I believe in God, but it's a belief in God, in his promises that ultimately are leading to Messiah Christ.
I need a righteousness that's not my own.
Yes.
Abraham believes, and it was credited to him as righteousness. He needs righteousness. It's got to come from someone else.
Yes.
It's got to come from not only somewhere else, someone else.
Yeah.
He saw Christ.
Yeah.
And if we want to read into this a little bit more, we'd say, theologically, I think the types and shadows by the Holy Spirit's power, that there was real sacramental presence. Christ was present by the Spirit, even in the types and shadows.
Yeah.
So, which I haven't always believed in my life, but in light of the 1 Corinthians passage, in the Hebrews passages, I think they received Christ. Even in a shadowy sense, in the types and the shadows. Otherwise, how could they be saved?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
If I don't think they could be saved if that weren't the case.
Yeah.
So, and I was just recently in Mark. So Mark chapter 9 verse 40. No, Mark chapter 9 verse 4.
Yeah.
At the Transfiguration, Elijah and Moses are there with Jesus. So how could they be there with Jesus? If they weren't saved? I think they actually were saved, and they're there with Jesus. They're not trapped in Abraham's bosom or somewhere else.
Sure, yeah.
They're there with him from heaven with God. And so it's a real salvation through a real Christ. And as the dimmer switch is turning on, obviously incarnation is important, but he pre-existed.
Yes, right.
Right?
Yeah.
Beforehand. And I'm doing this, the Voss triangle.
Right, sure. Yeah.
Right? In light of the book of Hebrews, you have the eternal one in heaven, always existing. He came down in the types and shadows, representing the heavenly.
Yes.
This is Voss, this is Hebrews. And then he actually came himself in substance at the incarnation. So cool stuff. Good. I'll admit I have a lot more to learn, but there's more going on than we probably were taught in dispensationalism or even non-dispensationalism, which is more rationalistic.
Sure. Yeah.
So
yeah.
Cool. Great question.
Yeah. That's a great
more
question.
To think about. We would commend Voss's Hebrews commentary to be thinking more and more about these things, and all of the places. I commend the book of Hebrews.
Yeah. Super good.
The rock was Christ, Mike. That just baffles my mind. It could only happen by the power of the Spirit.
Yeah. It's amazing. Amazing to think about and just sit and ponder. We could just sit and talk about that for quite a while here.
Indeed.
Okay, let's move on to another question. This question comes to us from Daniel, and Daniel has listened to episode 47 of ours on marriage and divorce.
I'm glad you told me which one it was, because I used to remember when we did 3 episodes, I knew which one was which.
When we had a handful, we could recall these, but now...
Episode 47.
Episode 47. If you haven't listened to that one, go give it a listen. Episode 47 on divorce and remarriage. Daniel has listened to that, and he is asking us about that episode, has a couple of questions from it. He says not several.
Oh.
Wants us to know it's not several questions.
That means he's listened to more than just that episode.
That means he's been around for a long time on the Pactum.
Pactum listeners, early days, like really early days, we were talking about who's listening and how many followers and all downloads and all this. And Mike Grimes said, well, we do have several listeners. Yeah. And I was like... Oh, several listeners?
Several. We have several. Okay. So...
in thousands translates in Mike Grimes' mind as several.
Several.
What kind of school did you go to?
It was in the state of Iowa, the great state of Iowa. Okay. So
There are several people living in Iowa.
having listened to episode 47 on divorce and remarriage, Daniel's asking, essentially, he has a couple questions. The first one is really about the offending party. He talks about divorce or marriage being permitted for the offended party. What about the offender? And,
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep, that's a fair question. To step back just a little bit in answering the question, I would, yes, commend the episode,
Yes,
especially
yeah.
for people who haven't heard it, because we're going to assume a lot of things here,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So we try to go into the deep end a little bit in the episode. Also, on that episode, we recommend a book. I'll recommend it now, Divorce and Remarriage in the Church, Biblical Solutions for Pastoral Realities, and that's by a man named David Instone-Brewer.
Yes.
And so that episode depended a lot upon him and his work.
Yes.
So let's preface everything with that, maybe not for Daniel, but for others.
Yep.
So Instone-Brewer does say this in the book, and I think in light of the bigger context and the work that he's done, he says, if the divorced partner marries someone else or rejects all the attempts at reconciliation, then we can assume that the person can stop trying for reconciliation and can remarry. So that's by deduction. He in a bigger context, which we're not getting into right now. So it seems that the offended party is free. Yes,
Right.
more
Yeah.
than seems.
Yeah.
But after a matter of time, it seems that the offender could, if there can't be any reconciliation, would be able to be free to remarry.
yeah.
So it's not the strongest argument in the world, but I think in context, it's a better argument than we're giving in this particular episode.
Yeah.
So I would recommend the book as, I guess, my cop-out, if you will.
Sure.
And maybe also, before we get to his second part of his question,
Yeah.
I think it's really important that listeners remember, Christians remember, pastors remember, that one of the reasons we have elders.
Yes. I was just going to say that. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the reasons we have elders, if the Bible had explicitly the answer to every situation and every scenario,
Yep.
we wouldn't need those who have wisdom.
Right.
And elders, by definition, are supposed to be wise.
Yes. Right.
So, okay, here's what the Bible says. Elders need to work on that. But also, here's what's happened. And here are the two sides to the story. And
Right.
here are the specifics, so that the elders have to end up making a decision and making a recommendation saying, based upon the Bible, based upon your situation and situations,
Yep.
and maybe based upon time, here's, to the best of our ability, prayerfully, our conclusion and recommendation.
Yes. Right. Yeah.
And in no way is that a cop-out or trying to
No.
be situational in our ethics.
No.
Really, by definition, elders do that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that's an important matter in
Very
all
important,
of this.
yeah.
And after however many 30-some years of doing pastoral ministry, you see it over and over again.
Yes.
You've got to think through the ins and outs and what would be best in the situation, given the biblical data.
Yeah. And so how thankful we are that the Lord places elders
Yep.
in churches to help shepherd people through these difficult situations, most definitely. So not just blanket statements here saying this applies to all. It's right. Elders are good. So his second question is kind of looking to address the issue of abuse, really what is abuse and kind of how that all works in the divorce marriage situations. He says, he's asking these questions because often he's dealing with friends who either are getting a divorce or have friends who are getting a divorce. And so he's just looking for a little bit of help here in these kinds of situations.
Yeah. And we obviously live in a time where a lot of things are labeled as abuse, and maybe they're not necessarily abuse.
Right,
It
yeah.
becomes a hard issue.
Yes, it
I
is.
guess maybe we should step back too and just say, divorce is not good. Divorce is bad because
right.
it has to do with sin on someone's
Yeah,
part.
yeah.
But oftentimes, especially in conservative circles like we run in, because we really believe the Bible and we think things should be conserved,
Yes.
like marriage.
Right.
We forget that, for example, in Jeremiah 3:8, God divorces. God divorced Israel. God is not bad. God is good. Israel, because of their sin, God divorces them. I think God did what was good and allowable.
Yeah, right.
So
Yes.
sometimes we cherry pick verses and we are shocked when we learn things like that. Maybe that's where we should have started. There's probably more to learn about divorce and remarriage than we even realize from a biblical perspective.
Sure, yeah.
So therefore, what as the basis for divorce and therefore remarriage. It's the breaking of the marriage covenant.
Yes,
So
correct.
what breaks the marriage covenant? That leads to our conversation that we had in that episode regarding abuse. Because if you're not upholding what you swore to do before God and witnesses, exchanging tokens, typically rings. I mean, this is a covenantal ceremony.
It's a covenantal ceremony, right.
So did you break your marriage vows? Well, if you broke your marriage vows, it's a violation of the covenant, and something like being abusive. And I'm not going to get into all the details, but people can obviously think if you're abusive toward your spouse, you're not loving, honoring, and cherishing in sickness and in health, good times and in bad times.
Yes.
And so there may be grounds for divorce.
Yeah.
But what if it's not physical? What if it's verbal? What's that look like?
Yeah.
What if it's I'm not providing for the needs of my spouse as I'm supposed to as a spouse?
Right.
There are grounds for divorce in these things. So what constitutes abuse? Maybe it's easy to identify when it's super blatant. Maybe it's a little bit more difficult when it's more nuanced.
Yes.
But it's one of the reasons we have elders.
Yes. Yeah. I really do think that's a helpful thing to keep in mind as you're considering these issues.
So we've had to work with people before to help them. What has happened? What does that look like?
Yes. Yeah.
What's the severity of it?
Yep.
What's the frequency of it? And those kinds of things.
Yep.
And in case people don't listen to the other episode and they only hear what we're saying here, which is unfortunate, we do think this is a very serious matter.
Yes, it is.
And one of the things when it comes to physical harm that we would always say and have always said ever since I've been a pastor at this church would be if you're in danger, you call the police.
Yes.
Because you being in danger is against the law.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
So you call the police, the church will pay for your hotel room, whatever it might be. Don't wait for elder counsel.
Right. Yes. Don't
to do that.
Yeah.
And we'll help you when we can.
Yes.
So keep that in mind.
Yep. Important as well. Okay, so we'll also link to that book for you and that episode so you can find that in the show notes. Okay, fifth question. This one comes from Daniel. This one is regards to covenant theology.
The same Daniel? Is he getting like another one in here, or is this a different Daniel?
You know what? I don't recall.
Okay. All right.
I don't recall if it's the same Daniel. I took the last names out. So Daniel, perhaps the same. Daniel 2.0, we're not sure. Okay. So Daniel asking about covenant theology, says he's listened to you several podcast episodes. It must be the same. I mean, is it the same? Several. He referenced several again. Okay. He's been asked to teach an adult Sunday school at a church.
No, I think the first Daniel did it tongue in cheek, and this Daniel
you just did it. It's in the vernacular.
That's
right. It's in the
That's what I think's happening. Okay.
So he's going to teach a adult Sunday school class at his church in East Texas, and he was given the green light to teach through the framework of covenant theology. He says he's new to it, but he also is seeing this as a way for him to learn it better by leading others in studying it and learning about it.
That usually happens.
Yes, and so he wants to know if we have any curriculum that might aid in teaching it and that we would recommend and encourage someone to use who's learning it and also leading others in learning it.
I think maybe on the Pactum we should recommend something that's a Pactum publication. We might have a book, and if it's not in your budget, we will send you one gratis.
Yes, we
for
will.
Free. There's a book called Covenant Theology, which is just my dissertation, and I'm going with that for obvious reasons because I'm hopelessly in love with myself and into self-promotion. In all seriousness.
But it is a good resource. I'll vouch for that.
Daniel, I wrote the book for people who don't know about covenant theology, or it's new to them, or they've heard that it's the boogeyman. So it might actually work perfectly.
Right.
It's trying to win people over with the Bible, not just Coxaeus, or Vitzius, or someone like that.
Yeah.
So I actually think it's geared toward people who love the Bible, but are not going to be convinced by you quoting theologians, even though you should quote theologians as well.
Right.
So I'm probably going to go with that. There are other good books written on covenant theology. There's actually lots of them.
Yes.
But Daniel, also know that not all covenant theologies are created equal. Mm-hmm. And the kind of work, the type, the brand that we're promoting would be, we would say, is bicovenantal. It's law gospel in its emphasis. So there are some kinds of covenant theology that see so much continuity in everything that it's almost like it's faith and works together. And that's not healthy. That's not helpful. That's not the kind we're promoting.
Right. Yeah.
So let's have a strong, robust commitment to a covenant of works, do this and live, and then covenant of grace. Obviously, Christ has fulfilled the obligation as the last Adam. And so we trust in him and him alone. It's based upon his works, not our own.
Right.
All of this because of the Pactum, because of the covenant of redemption, before the foundation of the world. So I think I would go ahead and start with that book, and it'll probably at least help people to see that it's biblical, and you can go from there.
Yeah. All right.
We need a study guide to the book.
A study guide.
Need.
Someone should write that.
There's a study guide to the active obedience book. On the list of things to do.
On the list. All right, another question. This one comes to us from Alex. A few more questions here to work our way through. But this one from Alex says, hey, Pat and Mike, hope you're doing well. Thanks for the content from the conference. He wasn't able to attend, but the audio has been encouraging. So, listener, if you haven't had a chance yet, you can go to our website and find the episodes. We released the audio from our conference as episodes, so you can go check that out if you haven't done so already. He wanted to ask a question that's been bothering him, and he's hoping we can provide some clarity here. He said, I understand the concept of total depravity, that all are born with a sinful nature, as we are all born in Adam. And he said, and I understand that we can only be saved through faith in the finished work of Jesus Christ, both as passive and active obedience, with a smiley face.
Love it.
On our behalf for righteousness. And he says, however, it seems to me that millions of people are born without any hope of ever believing in this, because without God's active intervention in their heart, they are incapable of believing.
Okay.
So
it's troubling. It's troubling to Alex about this whole matter. So what we would want to say is, yes, it's true. Many people, everyone's responsible to believe.
yes, right.
But not everyone will believe. How is it that people come to believe? Only because of the regenerative work of the Spirit. It's true. God has to act.
Yes.
But God made us alive together with him.
Right.
So it's a matter of, your question's getting at fairness and what's fair. And we have to say, acknowledging some mystery, that everyone deserves to go to hell. All are dead in trespasses and sins.
Yes.
Ephesians 2, 1 and following.
Yeah.
And God chooses to save many. So is God just? God is just. And he's not only just, he's gracious and merciful. Is everyone going to hear and everyone going to believe? No. Is God going to regenerate everyone? No. Has God elected everyone? No. Why? I don't know. I'm not God. But I do know that this is what the Bible teaches.
Right. Yeah.
So our desire is to preach Christ to everyone. We want everyone to hear. And we do this because we know that faith comes by hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ. Romans chapter 10. It's been a long day already. Romans chapter 10. And God uses us. God uses evangelism to bring about saving faith in the life of the elect. So it reminds me of Acts 13:48. All who had been appointed unto eternal life believed.
Yes. Right. Yeah.
So we can still have questions, but at the end of the day, not everyone has been elected, not everyone's been predestined, but everyone does deserve condemnation.
Yes. Right. Yeah.
And so God is utterly gracious to save one, but he saves countless millions from our perspective. I would recommend to Alex that great little book by R.C. Sproul called Chosen by God. It is a great resource that tries to help people think through some of these issues and even matters of fairness and justice. I think that actually would be a good place to go to. Yeah. At the end of the day, why does God do what he does? Because he's God. Why doesn't he do what I do? Because I'm Pat.
Yeah, right.
And to the degree that we're troubled and we're burdened for people, it's good to be troubled and burdened for people because we long to see people saved. But if what you don't want to do is start questioning God in an antagonistic way.
Right.
God does what God is free to do because he's God.
Yes, right.
This is how he's chosen to do it. And if you're burdened for people because there are people who haven't heard the gospel yet, that's called missions.
Yes, yeah.
That's called supporting. That's called sending.
Right.
How will they know without a preacher?
Right.
So that's one of the reasons why we're committed to having people trained and going to other places around the world to preach Christ to people.
Yeah. Excellent.
Evangelism and the Sovereignty of God by J.I. Packer.
J.I. Packer.
Chosen by God by R.C. Sproul. This last week I was just recommending that book. Great chapter, double, toil and trouble.
Double.
Maybe
Toil
my
and trouble.
very, very favorite chapter
That's
title
great.
of all.
That's great. All right, our seventh question coming from...
2 more to go, right?
Yes, two more to go. This one is an anonymous question from Bruno.
Oh, we made that name up. So the last 2 are anonymous. So we've got Bruno. Let's say number 8 is Mars.
Okay.
Bruno and then Mars.
Bruno Mars. Okay, so Bruno asks us...
As one does if you're named Bruno.
He's asking about Santa Claus because why not? This is a Christmas Day episode. It should be Christmas Day when this is airing. And
Originally, if you're listening in August.
True.
Kind of
know.
weird.
So, but I know our Pactum Verse listeners, they wake up every Wednesday morning. First thing they do is log in and
Some
find...
of them do indeed.
You know? So, Christmas question here about Santa Claus. What should Christians teach their children about things like Santa Claus?
Oh, of the devil. So much deviling. It's why he wears red. It's why I don't know the rest of it. So this past Sunday, I was walking around with my little thing of Tic Tacs. Did you see me?
I saw you. I
had
thought,
Tic
that's got to be a
Tacs.
prop.
Yeah,
What's
I
he
got
doing?
them at the local grocer.
That's fantastic.
So the Tic Tacs, something about lump of coal.
Okay.
And so they were black.
Oh, I saw they were black.
Naughty or nice, lump of coal.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
And then in fine print that I can't read without my glasses, it said something about dark cherry. So I thought when I was at the grocery store, I thought it was some taste like coal, others taste like cherry, and it's like trick.
Yeah, right. Or like the jelly bean thing, like you're trying to see if you get like dirty socks or something.
I was so excited about the whole thing. They all tasted like cherry.
Oh,
it was kind of a jip. But on Sunday morning, that's just kind of fun, like to walk around and ask people. And so anyway, so there was one family, and I asked the kid if he wanted to have some, and he looked at his dad, and his dad said, "It's okay to take candy from the pastor. We know him and trust him." He's not a stranger. And in my mind, I thought, this isn't good because too many pastors are creeps, and we can't trust them, unfortunately, but I digress.
Yeah.
So, but when he looked at it, and it was Christmassy, the young man, and he was a boy, and he said, "Santa Claus isn't real." So I guess that's the answer to the question, Bruno. Santa Claus isn't real.
Santa Claus isn't real.
But I gave a little pushback. I wanted to engage a young theologian who was confident. I said, well, actually, I think he is real because when you go to the mall, you can see him. And there are books about him. But then I said, but he's a fictional character. He's real in the fiction, in the story, right?
Yeah.
And the young man, he bought it, kind of, a little bit of skepticism.
Yeah.
So what we do in our family, you can tell us what you do in your family, but we have like a Santa that was mine when I was a little boy, and Molly uses it to decorate because it's an antique now.
Yeah.
So we don't mind Santa Claus. We have stockings. Molly loads the stockings with all kinds of stuff. But we've always told our kids, this is fiction, this is made up. But it's kind of fun.
It's fun, sure, yeah.
So
to
wake up and there's a bunch of stuff in a sock.
Right, yeah. We do the same kind of thing, exactly. We do that. They know it's not real, but we enjoy it. It's fun. So watch the movies, do the deal.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah.
Do your kids ever like spoil it for other kids?
I don't know if they ever have actually spoiled it. I've always told them, now listen, if little Susie or Billy, whoever it is in class is talking about you, just let it go. Let's not be those Scrooge people. Let's not do it. Just let it go.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Santa Claus is not real.
Santa Claus is real.
It's true.
So, if your family chooses to go for it, by all means, go for it.
But but if you choose to be that kind of person, I've got a young man in our church that I'd like to introduce your kids to. If my older kids have kids and I have grandkids one day, I'll tell them the truth. I'll just wreck them for life.
Grandpa Pat's going to ruin it. Oh, man. All right.
I do think it's important that we don't. I mean, especially because of the tie-in to Christmas in the incarnation of Jesus. Yeah. So we're going to lie to them about one thing, but tell them the other thing that's even harder to believe.
Yes, right. And expect
virgin
them to
conception.
Believe. Yeah, right. Yeah.
I don't think it's a helpful look. No. So, but I don't think we have to be grumpy about it.
No, we don't have to be grumpy.
So we're going to keep
because he's jolly, so we can be jolly.
There you go. And otherwise, how are you going to ride in the sleigh if it doesn't have enough faith in the faith meter?
Okay. All right, last question for Mars. Mars wants to know if we've ever considered...
Men are from Venus, women are from Mars, or whatever that
Mars wants to know if we've ever considered taking Pactum the Pactum on the road, which we've sort of done that before.
Road again? We kind of have before, and now that we are on YouTube, Mike, you're going to have to bring a lot more stuff.
We need more suitcases. We're going to need a bigger boat.
Remember when we were both in California, we had different Airbnbs, and you were like walking to my Airbnb with your suitcases.
It's of equipment and gear setting up.
Hello, Carlsbad, California. You just fit in with other homeless people.
I did. I felt like I was at home there doing that.
That was poolside
Pactum. That was a great fun episode. Yeah.
So yes, we've done things like that before. We will in the future. Having said that, we've been asked if we would ever do like a conference somewhere else, and maybe someday. But for now, it's Omaha. It's Omaha,
Right.
October.
Yeah. You want to be there.
It's nice.
Yeah.
The colors are changing. The leaves are changing. It's football season.
Yep.
We've got Midwest Runs of Sandwiches. Maybe they'll sponsor the next Pactum conference.
Hey, you never know. There's
We're
hope for
working
that.
on such
Yeah.
things.
Well, thank you so much for being a part of the Pactumverse, and thanks for listening. As always, you can find more from
And watching.
Yes, and watching. As always, you can find more from us on thepactum.org. You can find us on X at the Pactum, on Instagram at the Pactum Theology, and here on YouTube. You can find us, search at the Pactum. Give us a like, give us a follow, give us a subscribe. I don't know what all that stuff is. Comment in the comments below. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on the Pactum.